Some people leave their homeland not because they want to, but because they're forced to carry with them the shame, the pain, and the loneliness. Clara Mae Ridley lived like that for many years, carrying the wounds no one saw. But when she returned to Dusty Hollow, the place where her father's honor was buried, she did not expect to meet the eyes of the only man who would never turn his back on her. He smiled, softly, deeply, as if he had recognized her from the first moment, even after all these years. But is a smile enough to heal the past? Does a woman once suspected by the entire town have the courage to choose between continuing to run or facing the truth? If it were you, would you dare to go back to the place that broke your heart? Sometimes it only takes a moment in life, the moment someone smiles as if they've known you all their life, to make you wonder, is it time to stop running? Please join the story to find out how that smile changed the fate of both people. Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any emotional journey. Mornings in Dusty Hollow always begin in an eerie silence. No honking, no city noise, just the wind whistling through the wooden fences, the distant sound of horse hooves, and the dry smell of the American West lingering on the tip of one's tongue as a reminder that this is not a place for the faint-hearted. The carriage slowed as it descended the long, red, dusty slope. The wheels scraped against the hard ground, making a grinding sound as if it too was afraid of what lay ahead. Clara Mae Ridley gripped the strap of her old leather suitcase, her hand pressing against the leather, browned by years of wear. The 40-degree morning wind blew up from the slits in her thick coat, making her shiver. She didn't know if it was from the cold or from her heart, trembling at the moment she'd been avoiding for 18 years. The carriage stopped in front of Dusty Hollow's main street. The wooden sign, "Welcome to Dusty Hollow, Wyoming Territory," hung at an angle, faded by the sun and wind. The musty street was just as Clara remembered it, only a little older, a little quieter, and perhaps a lot more rugged. She pulled her hat down low, almost hiding half her face. No one would recognize her. Not now. Not while she had not yet recovered from all the losses life had thrown at her. Dusty Hollow. "Ma'am," the old driver said. Clara nodded and stepped down. Her boots hit the dry ground, kicking up a thin mist of dust. She inhaled deeply, feeling the scent of the western wind in her lungs, pine, sun, and old times. She had sworn she would never return to this place. Yet here she stood today, a stranger in the land of her youth. Clara picked up her suitcase and walked quickly toward Maple Haven, the only inn that had remained open for decades. She didn't want anyone to see her face. Each step felt like she was carrying the weight of her lost life. But just then, the sound of horse hooves echoed from the end of the street. Slow, steady, regular as the heartbeat of one accustomed to trials and storms. Clara glanced over, and her heart stopped. A man on horseback was approaching her, tall. His marshal's badge glinted in the morning sun. His dark brown tweed coat and black cowboy hat cast a long shadow on the ground. His horse, a muscular Appaloosa, walked slowly but powerfully. Clara turned away immediately. Her breathing became rapid. It couldn't be him. There was no way Elias Ward was still in Dusty Hollow, still riding down Main Street like they'd been young. There was no way he'd recognize her after all these years. She pulled her hat lower and walked so fast she was almost running. But Elias stopped his horse nearby. And then, what Clara feared most happened. He dismounted. His boots hit the ground with a surprisingly heavy thud that echoed loudly in the morning silence. Clara didn't dare look up, but she could feel his eyes on her gaze as calm and deep as the Wyoming hills in late winter. There was a long silence. The wind ruffled the bit of brown hair that peeked out from under the brim of her hat. Then, a familiar voice rang out from ahead. Deep, calm, and so painful that it almost made her want to burst into tears immediately. "Clara." "It is." She stood frozen. All her thoughts were broken. He recognized her, just by looking. After 18 years. The morning wind blew through the street, carrying with it the tinkling sound of the wind chimes hanging in front of the old grocery store. The air seemed to freeze into patches. Clara took a calming breath. She lifted her head a little, just enough to see that Elias's eyes were the same as they'd always been, warm, calm, and as if he'd known her soul all along. But what almost made her collapse was his smile. A smile as light as the wind touching the surface of a lake. A smile without resentment, without questions, without blame. A smile as if he had been waiting for her to return, as if he had always known she would return. A smile as if he knew her, forever. She immediately turned away, her heart pounding. "Sorry. You have the wrong person," Clara said quickly, her voice trembling slightly, then hurried into the old grocery store, where the dim light seemed to help her escape reality. The glass door made a soft click. It was darker inside, and the smell of old wood made her feel as if she were lost in memories. Clara stood behind a shelf, clutching her suitcase tightly. Her breathing was labored. She could hear her heart pounding like an urgent knock on the door. Why did he recognize her? Why, after all these years, just by looking at her, did he still know it was her? And why did her heart ache so much when she saw that smile outside the window? Elias stood beside the horse, looking in through the dusty glass. He didn't try to enter. He just stood there, silently, the way he had always stood beside her when she was young. She felt her eyes grow hot. A tear fell onto her hand that was clutching the suitcase. Clara said to herself, "No, I can't let my emotions drag me away again. I'm coming back for the truth, not for him." But in the darkness of the grocery store, with the 40-degree cold penetrating her layers of clothing, Clara knew one thing very well. The peace she thought she would find in silence was completely shattered by a single smile. Clara walked slowly down the narrow hallway of Maple Haven, clutching the key she had just received. The old wooden floorboards creaked under her footsteps, the quiet breathing sound of a house that had stood too long in this harsh land. The space had changed little from her memory, just a little darker, a little older, but still warm, like a temporary home for travelers crossing windy Wyoming. Her room was on the second floor, facing the empty lot behind, lined with old pine trees. When the door closed, all the noise outside seemed to be swallowed up, leaving only a sense of silence. Clara set her suitcase down on a chair, took off her hat, and smoothed her hair, tangled from the long journey. It was far enough away from the main street of Dusty Hollow to allow her to regain the steady breath she had lost when she saw Elias. She sat down by the window. Her hand touched the old letter in her pocket. The letter had old folds. The paper was thick but brittle. Her mother's handwriting was soft, like a woman who lived by silent understanding. Clara opened the letter, her eyes scanning the familiar lines. Her mother told of her final days, of her unspeakable torment, of the death of her husband, who had been the rock of the family before being accused of treason. The last line was like a small knife in Clara's heart every time she read it. You must return to Dusty Hollow. The truth is not where you are, but where you left it. Clara closed her eyes. She remembered clearly the day her father was taken away. The townspeople gathered outside the gate, their cold gazes, their heavy rumors like stones thrown against the glass door. She herself could only stand behind the wooden door, trembling and crying silently. The only person standing beside her at that moment was Elias, but she did not let him near her. The day she left Dusty Hollow, Elias ran after the stagecoach until the dust obscured the road. He called her name, his eyes full of pain. But Clara didn't turn around. She didn't have the courage to see it again. For 18 years, the fear of judgment had haunted her like a shadow that refused to leave. Many things could be overcome, but the wounds of prejudice were the hardest to heal. Clara had tried to bury them all, but her mother's death had made her realize that she could not hide forever. The truth about her father could not be forgotten. His honor, and the life Clara had lost, needed to be restored to its rightful place. There was a soft knock on the door. The landlady, Eliza's voice came in, deep and warm. She asked if Clara needed more hot water or anything. Clara said she was fine, then turned back to her letter. Eliza didn't recognize her. That alone was enough to make Clara feel a little better. She put the letter down on the table, opened the suitcase, and pulled out a small pine box. Inside was the only thing her father had left, a scorched piece of metal, engraved with a military insignia. Beside it was a piece of paper, carefully wrapped by her mother, with a symbol like a dot on a map. Clara stared at the symbol, a feeling of unease spreading in her chest. If her father had not betrayed her, then who had done it all and why? The symbol still appears at the bottom corner of Mom's letter. It's a reminder the truth is still out there somewhere. Clara touched the metal with her fingertips, cold, rough, scratched like a struggle. Her hand trembled slightly. It felt like her father was trying to leave her something. A warning, a plea, or a clue that would open a door she had closed for so long. A breeze blew through the window, causing the curtains to flutter. Clara opened her eyes and looked outside. Elias was standing in the backyard and leaning against the old railing. He was staring out into the valley, unaware that Clara was standing behind the glass, silently watching. Though his figure had changed, Clara recognized him immediately. The broad back, the cowboy hat that cast a shadow over his shoulders, the thick ash-brown coat, all combined to create the image of a man who had spent more than half his life in the storms of the West. It was still Elias. Long, resilient, full of the strong breath of this land. Clara stepped back a little when his eyes suddenly turned to the window. She wasn't sure if he could see her. She wasn't sure if he even wanted to know why she left that day. That question always hung in the air whenever she thought of Elias. Why hadn't she said anything to him? Why had she walked away silently, as if he didn't matter? She leaned back against the wall, her hands clenching her collar. The truth was, Clara was scared. When the town turned against her family, she feared Elias would do the same. She chose to disappear, so he wouldn't have to bear the burden of loving someone the community had condemned. She chose silence, because it was the only choice she thought would protect them both. But now, that silence became the thing that made Clara feel the most vulnerable. Elias recognized her immediately. He did not avoid her. He did not show any coldness, only peace, and a smile that made her cry for a moment. It made her not know how to face it. Clara returned to her desk, took a deep breath, and opened her notebook, writing down the things she needed to do. Find out her father's past. Determine the meaning of the map symbols. Find out the truth her mother wanted her to know. And most importantly, distance herself from Elias before she got caught up in emotions she shouldn't have. As she wrote, she felt a weight on her heart. Fear and determination were intertwined like two threads, neither willing to let go. Clara knew the journey would not be easy, and Dusty Hollow was not a place for the faint-hearted, but she was back. There was no turning back. Elias's silhouette still lingered in the window. Clara closed her eyes, letting his figure fade into the pale light. She told herself she had time. Everything would be clear. She just had to be strong enough to face it all. The air in town that day was distant, but filled with small, stirring sounds. The sound of horse-drawn carriage wheels rolling over gravel. The sound of a coffee shop door opening and closing. The dry wind blowing through the old wooden steps. They all combined to create the rhythm of Dusty Hollow. A rhythm Clara thought she had forgotten, but remembered with every breath. She sat in her room, listening for the slightest noise to convince herself that she was still calm. Her palms rested on the worn pine table, her fingers trembling slightly with each breath. Part of her wanted to leave town immediately. The other part refused to let go, determined to stay and find answers. Clara was so startled by the knock on the door that the pencil on the table fell to the floor. It was a light but firm knock, a knock as if the person outside was in no hurry, not being rushed, and not needing to be overly polite, just waiting. Clara stood still for a few seconds, listening to her heartbeat. Then she walked over and opened the door a little. Elias Ward stood there. No words, no attempts to meet her eyes, no questions as to why she had avoided him for so many years. Just standing, hands folded at his waist, his gaze calm as if he had anticipated this since riding down the slope into Dusty Hollow. Clara was silent. Her eyes scanned his form, not daring to linger. The wrinkles at the corners of Elias's eyes were more pronounced, deeper, but they made his face look calmer than before. The graying hair at his temples gave him the experienced look of a man who had lived long enough to know that silence was sometimes the only answer. And that both reassured and pained Clara. Elias spoke slowly, enough to fill the space between them. I just wanted to make sure you were okay. Clara Mae? Clara felt her heart constrict. He said her name softly, touching an old wound that didn't tear it open, only made it ache in a dull, inescapable way. I'm fine. Thank you. Her voice was hoarse, like someone who hadn't slept all night. Elias nodded slightly. He stood still, his eyes unscrutinizing, unhurried. There was a strange peace about him that made Clara turn away to maintain some necessary distance. I heard you rented a room here. Maple Haven is still the safest place in town. If you need anything, talk to Eliza. He paused before continuing. Or talk to me. The simple sentence made Clara feel like the ground beneath her feet shook a little. It wasn't because he was trying to invade her life, but the way he stood there, without asking, without forcing, made her feel like she wasn't as alone as before. Clara opened the door a little wider. It was a small gesture, but Elias immediately understood that she did not want any more confrontation. He did not enter, but stood in the doorway, polite enough to keep his distance, close enough so that the silence between them did not become a wall. Don't you have anything to ask me? Clara finally said. Her voice was small, but it carried years of haunting questions. Why did he still recognize me? Elias looked at her longer. The way he looked made Clara feel seen more clearly than at any other time. If you want me to ask, he answered slowly. But I think you've had enough questions for a lifetime. Clara paused. Her chest felt like it was being squeezed. I just need to know one thing, Elias continued. Did you come back here out of pain or hope? The question made Clara's hand tighten on the edge of the door. Both. She spoke the truth, her voice trembling slightly. I came back because I needed to know the truth. I also came back because... She paused, unsure whether to continue. Elias did not press. He seemed to understand her struggle. His eyes followed every slight movement of Clara's face, as if even the slightest change mattered to him. For a moment, Clara felt as if she were back in her younger years, when he was the only person in town who had treated her father with respect. He had stayed by her door through the roar of the crowd. He had stood in front of her when people looked at her suspiciously. He had followed her to the town gate the day she left, calling her name until his voice was hoarse. She didn't turn back. She didn't dare turn to look at him. And now, Elias was standing right in her doorway as if there had never been any distance. Clara opened her mouth, wanting to say something strong enough to break the silence, but the words stuck in her throat. Elias looked at her for a few more seconds. If you don't want to say anything more today, I understand. He touched the brim of his hat, an old habit used as a greeting instead of a farewell. Just know, I'm not here to question or blame. Clara felt choked up. She asked, So, why are you here? Elias dropped his hand, his face unfazed. Because I saw the loneliness in his eyes, and I had seen it before. That simple statement made Clara lean against the door to keep her balance. She turned away to hide her eyes that were shimmering with emotion. But Elias stood there, silent, patient enough to wait for her to recover. After a moment, he took a step back. I won't bother you again, but don't shut your heart again. Clara Mae, this town is tough, but not everyone has turned their back on you. Clara felt her heart constrict. She wanted to say thank you, but could only whisper, I need time. I know. Elias touched the horse's head, tethered downstairs. Time, Clara Mae, is sometimes the only thing that keeps you standing. He left, walking slowly, his figure blending into the pale dusk of Dusty Hollow. When he disappeared around the corner of the blacksmith shop, Clara realized her hand was still on the door, shaking slightly and unable to stop. She pressed her forehead against the edge of the door. Her heart was torn between the desire to be near him and the old fear that never stopped hurting. Part of her wanted to believe that Elias could be a fulcrum in her quest for the truth. Another part warned that he would only be drawn into danger if she got too close. Clara closed her eyes, trying to contain her confusion at his sudden appearance in her life. She knew things had only just begun. Clara left Maple Haven as the light quietly settled over the town like a thin layer. The smell of earth mixed with the wind made her realize that Dusty Hollow still had the pensive look of a land that had witnessed too many ups and downs. Main Street stretched out before her, each old shop standing like a silent witness to a past she tried to forget. Each step took her deeper into the familiar yet strange scene, like stepping into a painting that had been torn and mended with memory. She'd only intended to go out and buy a few things. A new notebook, some bread, some ink, something to help her focus on what she needed to do instead of letting her mind wander to Elias. But the town had a way of making people remember the things they most wanted to forget. Clara had just passed the bakery when the sound of hammers pounding metal came from the forge. She paused for a moment. The smell of hot steel and the heat of the fire reminded her of the face that had once called her father, Dear Master. The blacksmith had always greeted her father with a broad smile. When the incident happened, that smile turned into a gaze colder than the metal he forged every day. He is still there. Clara forced herself to keep walking, hoping he wouldn't recognize her. But not long after, a familiar hoarse voice rang out from behind her. I know that look. Clara Ridley. She tightened her grip on her bag and turned. The blacksmith was older now, his hair grayer, his shoulders slumped with age, but his eyes were the same look that had kept her from leaving the house during the darkest days of her life. I'm just a passerby. She tried to keep her voice calm. I don't want to cause trouble. The blacksmith took a step forward. The firelight from the forge behind him fell on his face, creating intersecting lines of light and shadow like old scars. You can't avoid trouble. The trader's daughter can't hide forever. The words fell heavily. Clara felt them hit her like a stone in the chest. She remained silent, not because she had nothing to say, but because she knew that any words would do nothing. His resentment stemmed from the loss of his younger brother, who had died in the smuggling incident that year. His brother had used a low-quality gun, a weapon gutted from the smuggling incident that Clara's father was blamed for. The blacksmith would never forgive him. Clara opened her mouth, trying to keep her voice steady. I know your family is in a lot of pain. I don't want to bring up the past. he interrupted. Old story. For you, it is old. But for us, it leaves a hole that can never be filled. She bowed her head. Silence. A difficult choice. But the only one she felt was right. Sometimes silence isn't an avoidance, but the only way to keep old wounds from opening further. Clara took a step back and turned away, but the blacksmith's voice echoed behind her, as if to pierce her pain even more. Don't expect everyone here to forget whose daughter she is. She didn't reply. She just kept walking until the sound of the hammering faded away. Clara went to the dry goods store. She picked out a few things she needed, trying to stay calm. But the truth was that her shoulders were shaking slightly after the confrontation. The shopkeeper came out from behind the counter. Her thin face and bright eyes made Clara feel a little warmer. Take your pick, girl. If you need any help, just ask. Her voice was as soft as water in a dry land. Clara nodded, feeling a glimmer of relief. But it didn't last long. As her vision cleared, her eyes drooped slightly. Clara saw recognition cloud her face. Are you Mr. Ridley's daughter? Clara put down the item she was holding, nodding slowly. Her hands were hidden under her coat to hide her trembling. The shopkeeper didn't look hostile, just sad, a little bit sorry. I remember your mother. She was the kindest woman in Dusty Hollow, she said, her voice cracking. What happened then? No one wanted. But this town was small, and grief spread quickly. Clara pursed her lips and took a deep breath. I knew. I wasn't here to reopen anyone's wounds. I just needed to find some remaining shred of truth. The shopkeeper looked at her longer. There was doubt, pity, and hesitation in her eyes. She wouldn't have it easy. But if her father was innocent, Dusty Hollow owed her family an apology. Clara bowed her head slightly. It felt like a soft stitch in the torn fabric of her heart. It didn't heal it completely, but it made it easier to breathe. As Clara stepped out of the shop, the wind picked up, carrying with it a low, rustling sound from the pine needles. She tightened her grip on her purse and looked up and down the main street. The isolation was as thick as a mist. Everyone who passed looked at her with a look that was either curious or averted. She understood. 18 years was not enough time for the town to forget the name Ridley. But when Clara returned to Maple Haven, Elias appeared at the end of the street. He was talking to a villager, a small smile on his face. When his eyes met hers, they were bright, without judgment, without reserve, a simple thing that confused her more than the harsh words of the townspeople. Elias stepped toward her, not in a hurry, not showing anything too obviously, just a presence as steady as a pillar of wood standing against a storm. Are you okay? He asked, his voice low as if trying to keep each word from touching her pain. Clara looked at him, a mixture of emotions. Part of her wanted to lean against him. Part of her wanted to back away. Part of her wanted to run away so she wouldn't bother him again. But Clara could only utter a few words. I just ran into some old friends. They weren't happy to see me. Elias didn't ask who. He didn't want her to repeat what had hurt her. He spoke softly. You don't have to go through this alone. Clara felt her heart sink. Elias was the same, quiet, thoughtful, not trying to change her feelings, just standing beside her the way people who understand each other stand beside each other. No interference, no judgment, no need for explanation. She gently avoided his eyes to hide the tears that were about to fall. I don't know if I can bear all this. Elias adjusted the reins of the horse beside him. You're back. That means you're stronger than you think. That made Clara want to cry, though she wouldn't allow herself to cry in front of him. She leaned one hand lightly on the wooden railing outside Maple Haven for support. Clara turned to look at him, then spoke so softly it was almost as if she were talking to herself. I was afraid of it all happening again, Elias replied in a very slow voice. There was nothing to repeat, if you chose to stand directly facing it. She was silent. Those words, so simple, seemed to stir up a layer of ashes buried deep within her. She realized that she was trembling not because she was afraid of the townspeople, but because she was afraid that she would run away again, like before. She could not do that again. She looked deep into Elias's eyes. Something in that look reassured her more than any apology or promise could. I will try, she said, but maybe I will need a little courage. Elias nodded slightly. Courage doesn't come all at once. It comes in steps, in strides. And he took them. Clara swallowed. The wind blew again, carrying the chill from the valley. But this time, she didn't shiver. She just felt a little more stable. As Elias turned away, His eyes still gave her a gentle glance before leaving the main street. Clara watched his figure until he disappeared around the corner. An indescribable feeling crept into her heart, whether it was hope or some other fear. She knew Dusty Hollow would test her. She also knew the townspeople wouldn't change their minds easily. But Clara felt very clearly that she was no longer alone, though the distance between her and Elias was still too great to overcome. His presence was the only thing that allowed her to breathe deeply as she walked through the streets filled with skeptical eyes. Clara returned to Maple Haven, knowing the journey would be longer than she thought. But after years of running, she had taken a small step toward the truth. Just a small step, but enough to spark the belief that maybe, this time, she wouldn't fail. Clara sat quietly for a long time in Maple Haven's small room, where the light coming through the window casts a hazy hue on the walls and creates the feeling that layers of memories are quietly turning over. It was quiet enough to hear the pine needles rustling against each other outside, like a thin soundtrack urging her to look straight at the things she had tried to avoid for so many years. She opened the wooden box she had brought with her. A scorched piece of metal with a strange symbol on it lay at the bottom, beneath the old, worn cloth. The symbol looked like a small arc with an unfamiliar diagonal line, and below it was a blurred number. Clara tilted the small object to the light, but no matter how she looked at it, the number was unclear. The only thing that was clear was that it belonged to the military, or at least had been in the hands of someone associated with the military. Her mother's last letter mentioned the symbol. She wrote that Clara must protect it at all costs because it was the only key to her father's peace. Clara had tried to find out before, but no one knew what it was, or they didn't want to know. Now back in Dusty Hollow, the urge to decipher the symbol was stronger. It was like a door ajar, waiting for her to enter, even if she might find a truth very different from what she expected. Clara stood up, put on her coat, and picked up her father's evidence. She knew the first person she should call was Luke Mallory, her father's best friend and former Army liaison. Luke had tried to protect her family when the incident happened, but he himself was caught in a whirlpool of suspicion from the community. She had never forgotten the look he gave her the day she left town quiet, helpless, but never hostile. Luke's house was at the end of the street, next to a dirt road that led to the fields. Clara walked slowly, each step bringing back fragments of her childhood. Luke had taught her to ride, had tapped her shoulder when she was afraid to fall. A rough man, but full of kindness. She only hoped that time had not changed him too much. The wooden house appeared behind the low fence. A thin wisp of smoke rose from the old chimney, indicating that Uncle Luke still lived there. Clara stood for a moment in front of the door, trying to calm her racing heart. Then she knocked gently. The door opened a crack, revealing a face older than she remembered, with a gray beard and eyes as deep as old wells. When he saw Clara, Uncle Luke was silent for a few seconds. His gaze wasn't as sharp as the others, but it wasn't joy either, just surprise mixed with a little pain. Clara Ridley. His voice was low and husky, but not heavy. I thought you would never come back. Clara took a deep breath. I have no choice. Luke, I need to find the truth. Uncle Luke stepped aside. Come in. If you dare to turn back, it means you are brave enough to hear what you need to hear. The house was simple but warm, with the smell of new wood and the soft crackling of firewood in the fireplace. Clara sat down in the chair across from him. There was a long silence, as they both considered where to begin. Finally, Clara opened the box and placed the piece of metal on the table. Do you know what it is? Luke's old eyes darkened at the sight of the symbol. He bent down and picked up the small object with trembling fingers. I didn't know you still had it. He turned the evidence back and forth under the light, then exhaled softly as if carrying away a heavy burden that had been lingering for a long time. This symbol did not belong to the smugglers that people used to talk about, father and son. His voice was deep and steady. It belonged to a special reconnaissance group of the Border Army. They had missions that no one was allowed to know about. Clara felt a chill run down her spine. Special reconnaissance, father and I. Never said anything about that. Uncle Luke looked at her, his eyes piercing the cracks in Clara's heart. He couldn't say. Those who took the mission were bound by oath. Once they signed, they had to carry the secret with them for the rest of their lives. Clara clenched her fists. So, father and son didn't betray the army. He was so loyal. He risked his honor. Uncle Luke's voice caught. He came to me the night before he was arrested. He said there was only one person he could trust with this evidence, and that was you. Clara pulled her hand back slightly, too moved to sit still. Me. Why me? Uncle Luke pursed his lips. Your father knew the town would turn on him, but he always believed that one day you would come back for the truth. This symbol was the only key to proving he didn't do what they accused him of. Clara touched the evidence. Her heartbeat echoed like footsteps in the small room. So who made all this happen? Who got her father convicted? Uncle Luke's face fell. The man your father was investigating. A military man working with arms dealers. Your father found him stealing guns and selling them to outlaws. When he tried to stop him, he was framed. Claire felt cold all over. That guy, is he still alive? Uncle Luke shook his head. No one knew. After your father was taken away, he disappeared from the area as if he had never existed. Those who had anything to do with him also fell silent. Clara clenched her fists. I have to find him. If he's alive, I have to know the truth. Uncle Luke looked at Clara, his old eyes glinting in the firelight. Are you ready? The truth doesn't always save. Clara, sometimes it destroys what's left. Clara took a deep breath. She couldn't live without knowing. A long silence passed. Uncle Luke put his hand on the piece of metal. Then I will help you. But first you need to be careful. There are people in Dusty Hollow who do not like the past being dug up, especially when it comes to the honor of the military of that time. Clara clenched her fists to keep calm. She was ready for anything. Uncle Luke studied her face for a long time, as if seeing the image of the man who had been his best friend in his daughter's eyes. He sighed softly. You resemble your father, more than you think. The words cut deep and warm. Clara felt the truth that her journey had just taken a new turn. It was no longer just about grief or the isolation of the town. Now it was about finding a secret that could change everything. As Clara left Luke's house, she held the piece of metal tightly in her hand. The wind blowing across the open land made her cloak flutter slightly. But this time she didn't feel herself shivering. Inside her, a quiet determination as steadfast as the bedrock of the West was slowly rising. The journey had just begun, and her father's past was no longer a shadow. Clara left Luke's house feeling as if her feet were barely touching the ground. Her mind was filled with unanswered questions, but also lit with a light she hadn't dared to believe in years. The truth about her father was near. The mark was no longer a meaningless object. It was part of a hidden story. Proof that her father had fought for what was right, and was not the traitor the town had believed him to be. But the more Clara learned, the more she sensed the sudden danger. Uncle Luke had made it clear there were people who didn't want the past brought up again. The person who had framed her father might still be alive, or there might be others involved. She clutched her coat tighter as she approached Maple Haven. Her heartbeat was slow but heavy, as if each beat carried a premonition that the road ahead would not be smooth. But she also knew she could not turn back. From a distance, she saw Elias leaning against the railing in front of Maple Haven, his arms lightly crossed over his chest. He did not look around, only looked out into the valley, where gusts of wind blew his long brown cloak. Clara slowed down, not because she was afraid of Elias, but because she wanted to maintain some composure before standing before a man who rarely revealed his thoughts in words. Hearing footsteps, Elias turned. His gaze met hers gently but sharply, as if he could tell just by looking at her that she was carrying something heavy in her heart. "Who are you seeing?" he asked in a soft voice that could not hide his anxiety. Clara stood closer to him, enough to feel the warmth of his strong body spread over her. The street at the end of the street, Luke Mallory's house. Elias nodded slightly, his eyes slightly downcast. Was he still living alone? Still, Clara replied, then fell silent for a moment. He told me. Something important. Clara held up the evidence in her hand. The light on the scorched surface made it clearer. Elias saw it, his eyes dark in a way Clara had never seen before. Attention, a wariness, and something like a deep, suppressed pain. "You've been carrying this since your father died," he asked. "Long ago. My mother told me to keep it. I never knew what it was until today." Elias did not touch the evidence. He let his eyes do the talking. It was the sign of a frontier scout. He spoke slowly, his voice low, as if he did not want anyone else to hear. Those men were not allowed to leave traces. Clara felt a shiver run down her spine. He knew the symbol. Elias looked at her, his eyes telling more than any words. "I've seen it before, but not many people know. Those who do don't want to talk about it." Clara's arm tightened around the evidence. "So, did that mean my father wasn't a traitor? Which means the truth isn't what Dusty Hollow believes," Elias said. "But Clara, touching the scout troop's secrets could put you in danger." The word sent a shiver down Clara's spine. I didn't care about the danger. I just wanted to clear my father's name." Elias took a deep breath. His eyes seemed to look straight into her soul. "I believe your father is innocent." The words made Clara's chest tighten. I had believed it for years, but there was no way to prove it. "Why do you believe that?" Clara asked, her voice so soft it was a whisper. "Because I know what he is like," Elias said, his eyes never leaving her face. "And because, if he had truly betrayed me, he would not have left you that piece of evidence. A traitor leaves no secrets that can exonerate him. A traitor trusts no one, but he trusted you." Clara turned away to hide the emotions that were rising like a wave. I felt like I had lost my father a second time. "No." Elias stepped closer, his voice soft but firm. "I'm looking for him." A long moment passed. Clara clearly felt Elias' presence beside her, a presence that was not loud, but so steady that her heart could not help but respond. Elias looked out at the road ahead and said, "I want you to tell me everything Uncle Luke said, every detail." Clara nodded, recounting the whole conversation, the officer's disappearance, the trap, her mother's words, her father's despair before his arrest. As she stopped, Elias placed his hands on the railing, gripping the wood as if to hold himself back from the emotions rising. "That officer," he exclaimed softly. "Maybe I know him." Clara paused. "What did he say? I had met someone involved in the secret shipment a few weeks before your father was arrested. He was acting strangely. I had my suspicions, but I was just a regular patrol officer at the time and had no authority to investigate further." Clara opened her eyes wide. "Do you remember his name?" Elias was silent for a long time. "Yes." He looked deep into her eyes, as if afraid that what he was about to say would change Clara's life. "His name is Jonathan Pike." The name was like an arrow piercing the fog in Clara's mind. Not familiar, but shocking enough, as if some memory within her was awakening without her even realizing it. "Is he alive?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "No one knows. He disappeared from Wyoming right after your dad." Clara clenched the evidence in her hand. "I have to find him." Elias turned to face Clara, his face so serious that she took a step back. "If you go this way," his voice was low and slow, "not only will the truth unfold, even things you don't want to mobilize will return." Clara straightened her back. I accepted. Elias looked at her for a long time, then nodded slightly like someone who was ready to stand with her, even though he knew the road ahead was full of risks. "Then I will go with you," he said. "Not to let you face it alone." Clara wanted to protest, but Elias's eyes silently told her that she didn't need to try to be strong alone anymore. A layer of wall in her heart was slowly cracking, but not enough for her to let him in completely. She nodded slightly. "Thank you." As Elias left Maple Haven, his tall, broad silhouette stretched across the ground, his step sure and strong, as if he had just decided something more important than his duties as a marshal. Clara stood watching, feeling like she had a companion, but at the same time, she knew that this journey would bring other shadows. That night, in the small room, she opened her mother's piece of paper again. The faint light reflected off the mysterious symbol. Clara whispered softly, "I will find the truth. Mother, wherever it leads, outside." The wind swept through the pines. The night was cold, but Clara did not shiver as it had in the past. For the first time in years, she felt no longer alone in Dusty Hollow. The tension in Dusty Hollow grew, like a string that had been tightened too much. Clara felt the change the next morning as she walked down the halls of Maple Haven. "Mrs." Eliza greeted her with her usual smile, but her eyes glanced out the window, as if to confirm something before continuing her work. That small precaution made Clara realize news of her visit to Uncle Luke had spread. Dusty Hollow always was. Nothing in this town stayed a secret for more than a day. Clara held a cup of hot tea and stood near the window, watching the main street. From there, she saw two men standing close together in front of Mr. Hardy's blacksmith shop. One was the blacksmith, the other was Mr. Dawson, the hardware store owner. They were talking and looking in the direction of Maple Haven. After a while, they shook their heads and turned away with displeased looks. Clara set her teacup down, her heart sinking. She knew why. A visit to Luke Mallory, who had been involved in her father's case, would surely stir up a stir in the town. The slightest suspicion would stir up old prejudices. No matter why she'd come, she told herself she was ready to face it. But when she did, each strange look made her heart heavier. Clara put on her coat and walked out of Maple Haven. The cold air on her cheeks sobered her. People passing by stared at her for a few seconds longer than usual. No one spoke as harshly as the blacksmith the other day, but their silence was much more uncomfortable. On the main road, Elias was leading his horse from the patrol station towards the blacksmith shop. His steps were steady and calm, but when he saw Clara, he slowed down a bit. His eyes were calm, but more alert than usual. Stepping closer, Elias spoke softly enough for the two of them to hear. "Are you ready, finding Jonathan Pike? We'll draw all eyes to you." Clara kept calm. "I can't stop." Elias, "I know." He nodded. "But there's something you should know before we go any further." Clara clenched her fists. "What?" He rested his hands on the saddle, his face dark. "People are saying that you met with Uncle Luke to reopen your father's case. They fear it will come back to haunt you, bringing with it things that many people would rather bury forever." Clara looked down at her old boots. "I just wanted the truth," Elias replied softly but firmly. "The truth always has a price. In this town, not everyone is willing to pay it." There was a moment of silence. Clara felt her chest tighten, as if those words were just the tip of the iceberg she was about to hit. "I asked about Jonathan Pike," Elias continued. "Some people remember him coming here around the time your father was arrested, but no one wants to press the matter further. He disappeared right after the incident, too coincidental to be suspicious." Clara took a deep breath. He thought, "He was still alive. I don't think men like him die easily," Elias replied, his eyes sharp. "And if he's alive, you'll have to be more careful than anyone in Dusty Hollow." Clara nodded, clutching the piece of metal in her pocket. Uncle Luke said the same, but I didn't want to stop. "I know." A softness escaped his voice. "I didn't want her to stop either." Clara turned to look at him. In his eyes, she saw the same determination that had kept her from leaving 18 years ago. Elias stood there, steady as an old pine tree in the vast Wyoming land, as if he would bear her burden if she would let him. But just as Clara was about to say something more, another voice rang out from behind. "Do you think you can come back here and do whatever you want?" Clara turned. Mr. Dawson was standing a few feet away, his expression critical. She remembered him as someone her father had helped. But when her father was suspected of betrayal, he had turned against her. "I'm not causing anyone any trouble," Clara said, trying to keep calm. "Mr. Dawson glanced at Elias. "You're going to let her dig up old history." Elias. "This town's been trying for years to forget. Now she's back, bringing all sorts of trouble," Elias replied in a low but firm voice. "She had the right to seek the truth." "What truth, Mr. Dawson growled. Her father had betrayed her. Everyone knew that. Elias took a step forward, his voice low, powerful. "I will not allow you to insult someone who cannot defend himself." "Mr. Dawson's eyes wavered. He looked at Clara, then at Elias, uncertain, as if cornered. "I'm just saying what the town thinks." Elias looked straight at him. "Sometimes what the town thinks is the wrong thing." The air thickened. "Mr. Dawson turned and walked away without another word. When he was out of sight, Clara turned back to Elias. "Thank you," she said softly. "No need for thanks," Elias replied. "It's just, I won't let anyone touch you again." A silence passed, but it was a silence gentler than any darkness Clara had ever faced. In the silence, she heard her heart. It was no longer just fear or avoidance. Something was opening, light as mist but real as breath. Clara lowered her voice. "I have a clue, but I might need to go to where my father used to live. The old house." Elias paused. "Clara, that place has been ransacked. There might still be someone keeping an eye out. I must find out." Elias. Her voice was sharp and determined. Perhaps there was something in the house that father had not yet hidden. He looked at her for a long moment, as if struggling between reason and the desire to protect her. Finally, he said, "I will go with you." Clara bowed her head slightly, her heart lightening a little. She knew this was no longer her own business. Her quest for the truth had thrust her into the center of suspicion, and Elias was choosing to stand by her, even if it meant turning him against the entire town. As they reached the end of the street, Clara felt the unfriendly stares at her back, but she also felt Elias's rock-solid presence beside her. With him, she didn't have to shrink back as before. Dusty Hollow can turn its back, can doubt, but it can't make her give up anymore. Before them, the road leading to the Ridley family's old home stretched darkly, winding through rows of old wind-swept pines, a place that had once been the greatest pain in Clara's life, now about to become the new starting point of her journey to restore her father's honor. Clara clenched her sleeves. Elias stepped close to her as a silent reassurance. The truth is waiting somewhere. And this time, Clara did not step forward alone. The road to the Ridley's old house was farther than Clara remembered. Rows of old pines grew close together, their trunks gnarled by the cold wind, casting shadows on the dirt road. Each step Clara took felt like touching a thick layer of memories that had lain dormant there. Elias walked beside her, saying nothing. He walked slower than usual, as if to give Clara a steady breathing rhythm to face what was to come. Clara stopped as the house emerged from the trees. The wooden walls were faded, the eaves were collapsed, the windows had peeling paint from the wind. The house stood there as a silent witness to years of pain, and the silence made Clara tremble slightly. Still, she did not turn away. Fear and determination mingled, forming a lump in her throat. Elias looked at her, his gaze neither urging nor discouraging. "If you're not ready, well, we can wait." Clara shook her head. "No, I need to do this. I've waited too long." Elias nodded slightly. "Let's go then." They entered the courtyard. Weeds grew along the steps, giving off a dry, pungent smell typical of the West. The front door was ajar, its old hinges creaking when Clara pushed it open. Inside, the air was cold and heavy, as if it had been frozen for years. Sunlight streamed through the windows onto the dust, making it seem as if time had stopped moving in this house. Clara entered the living room first. Everything had been taken in the foreclosure, but though it was empty, she recognized the position of every chair, every picture frame, every small object. Every empty space in the room was a blank in her memory. "My father sits here often," Clara said softly. "He often reads the newspaper, and my mother sits embroidering near the window." Elias surveyed the room, his eyes moving slowly to take in every detail. The house still smelled of them. His voice was low, but as something was wrong, he went to the fireplace, knelt down, and traced a crack across the wooden wall. It was not natural. Someone had searched the place thoroughly. Clara shuddered. The authorities had ransacked everything when her father was arrested. Elias shook his head. It wasn't just them. This was the mark of someone looking for something, or making sure no one else found it. Clara clenched the piece of metal in her pocket. "He thought they were looking for this evidence?" "Maybe," Elias said, standing up. "But if they knew your father hid it in the house, they would have taken it long ago. Which means he hid it well." They entered her father's study. It was more marked than the living room scratches on the floor. A bookcase door off its hinges, a desk drawer forced open. Clara walked to the desk, feeling her father's breath linger at her fingertips. She bent down and opened the bottom drawer. It was empty, except for a thick layer of dust. Clara swallowed, trying to calm herself. Something wasn't right here. Elias stood behind, watching closely. His father had a habit of keeping secrets. People who had been in special reconnaissance teams never left secrets in plain sight. Clara sat down on the floor, looking around. "My father had once told me, the most precious things are hidden in the most unlikely places." She paused. A place everyone could see, but no one really cared. Elias followed her gaze. "What are you thinking about?" Clara stood up and walked to the corner of the room next to the bookshelf. "This wooden shelf." She touched the edge lightly. "When I was little, I used to play hide and seek here. The back of it wasn't pressed against the wall. Dad said he wanted to leave some space for the air to circulate." Elias approached and gently pushed the bookshelf with his hand. It moved a very small distance. It didn't seem to be firmly secured. They both groped for support underneath. After a few seconds, Elias found the hidden pivot. He pressed lightly. The bookcase shook, then swung sideways. Behind the shelf was a small compartment just big enough for a person to crawl into. A thin cloud of dust flew out, making Clara take an emotional step back. What was her father hiding here? Elias lit a match and looked inside. There was a chest. Clara knelt, her hands trembling slightly as she touched the dark wooden chest. Dust covered the surface like an old cloth. The lock was rusted but unbroken. She opened the lid, bit by bit, as if opening a past she had not dared to touch for too long. Inside were an oilcloth-bound document, a small leather book, and a faded map. Clara reached out and touched the first leather book. It was warmer than she expected, as if her father had held it long before putting it away. Elias looked closely at the documents. This is a big deal. Clara opened the book. The first page was in her father's handwriting. The words were shaky, as if written in haste, but still legible. If anyone finds what I wrote here, it means I have no chance to tell the truth. The traitor is not me. His name is Jonathan Pike. He conspired to take the guns from the scout station and sell them to the deserters. I know too much, and he knows I know. I cannot let him continue. If you find this, Clara, you must be stronger than me." Clara trembled, her hands gripping the notebook so tightly her knuckles turned white. Each word in the diary felt like a stab. Yet at the same time, a bright ray of confirmation deep in her heart her father was innocent. He had fought, but he was isolated and trapped. Elias placed his hand on her shoulder, his eyes heavy but bright with determination. "We must protect these documents. This is the ultimate proof." Clara nodded, her breath coming out hoarsely. "My father had been fooled. The whole town had been fooled." Elias squeezed her shoulder gently, his voice low. "The path you are on is no longer simply about restoring your father's honor. This is a fight against those who wanted your father gone forever." She closed the book, her eyes fixed on the file cabinet. I was no longer afraid. Clara's voice was as sharp as steel tempered by fire. Wherever this took me, I had to see it through. Elias looked at her, and in that moment the silence in the room seemed to melt away. There was a soft power in Clara that he knew he could not contain. She was no longer the girl who had left town. Before him stood a woman with a strong heart, brave enough to face the darkness that had enveloped her life. As they both stood up, a slight, unexpected noise came from the porch, very small, but enough to make Elias spin around immediately, one hand on his gun. Clara's eyes widened, her breath hitching. Elias spoke softly, his voice low and sharp. "Someone is watching us." The room suddenly became quiet, so quiet that Clara could hear the beating of her ears. Before the darkness of the past could completely fade, a new darkness appeared right in front of the porch. The moment the noise rang out from the porch, the air in the room seemed to condense. Clara stood still, her body reacting slower than her thoughts, while Elias turned around in alertness. He placed his hand on the gun with the familiar movement of someone who had spent many years dealing with danger, just looking at his straight back and cold eyes. Clara immediately understood that the situation was not simple. Elias gestured for her to step back. The small but protective gesture made Clara's heart clench. From her spot in the corner of the room, she held her breath and listened to every sound outside. A few dry leaves swirled in the wind, the clank of metal hinges somewhere further away. Very faint, but enough to indicate the presence of a living person, not just wind or branches. Elias walked slowly toward the door. If anyone was there, they had better not do anything stupid. His voice was low, sharp, and unwavering. No one answered. Clara took a step forward, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it was about to burst out of her chest. He thought, "How long have they been following us?" Elias hadn't looked back, not since he'd left town, or maybe even earlier. He'd left the door ajar, keeping his gun tilted slightly to avoid confusion, but still ready. The porch was quiet. The wind, carrying the scent of dry earth and pine, blew through the abandoned front yard. A broken board creaked loudly as it rubbed against another. Elias stepped out, his eyes scanning every direction, his face a compass, analyzing the slightest change in his surroundings. Clara stood behind him, breathing unevenly. Someone had been standing there not long ago. Elias bent down and picked up a boot print in the soft dirt, quite fresh. Clara looked down at the boot prints. The soles were serrated, the kind often seen on forest rangers or men who worked at the patrol station. Whose? He thought Elias looked at her, his eyes thoughtful, very much like the kind Jonathan Pike used. The name silenced them both for a few seconds. The air felt heavy, thick with unspoken words. The notes in her father's leather notebook had mentioned Pike as a lurking shadow, the one behind the series of failures that had befallen her father. And now, this boot print was a reminder that that shadow still haunted Clara. Elias went back into the house and closed the door. "We can't stay here long," he said slowly. "If Pike knows you're back in town, he won't stand for it." Clara sat down on the dusty chair by the wall, her father's diary clutched in her hands. "I've been running from this place for too long. I don't want to run any more." Her voice was hoarse but firm. If he risked his life to protect the truth, I must do my part. Elias looked at her, his eyes filled with pity and admiration. "But you don't have to go alone. Not this time." The silence suddenly became a little warmer. Clara tilted her head slightly, looking at Elias's face, a face that had endured many trials and losses, but still maintained a deep serenity. In that moment, she realized that perhaps he was the only person who had not turned his back on her family over the years. A light knocking sound against the window made them both tense. Elias immediately stepped forward, but this time it was only a pine branch that was blown by the wind. Even so, the tension remained on his face. "We have to get all this material back to Maple Haven," Elias said. It needs to be kept somewhere safer. I'll ask Luke to keep an eye on him. He's someone I trust completely." Clara nodded, but her hand lingered on the file cabinet. I wanted to see more, to know the full extent of what my father had written, and to understand what he had defended to the end. Elias came over and sat down beside her. "We'll see it's dangerous here, but if you really want me to, I'll stay with you a little longer." She looked at him. "Elias, you don't have to risk it for me." He took her wrist lightly. "I didn't take any chances. I chose." Those words made Clara pause, trying to catch her breath. Elias's gaze softened just enough to keep her from feeling pressured, but strong enough to make her feel more stable on her feet. Clara opened the next file. The pages contained military markings, lists of weapons delivery men, schedules of deliveries, maps of old tunnels in the valley. Each page revealed another layer of hidden truth. "Look at this," Clara said, handing Elias a printed sketch. "My father had made a map of the secret route. Pike used it to smuggle weapons out of the country, and my father had found that route." Elias studied the map, his eyes deepening. If this was true, then his father's conviction was simply a way for Pike to eliminate the only person who could expose him. The tears Clara had been holding back for years suddenly came flooding out. Father had tried to save his honor, and to save the town from something worse. Elias touched her shoulder lightly. "He fought to the very end. Now it's your turn." Clara closed the file. "I didn't just want to prove Father's innocence. I wanted everyone to know who was causing so much suffering to so many innocent people." Elias nodded vigorously. "We will bring the truth to light, but we must proceed step by step, carefully, for Pike is not the type to stand still when threatened." Suddenly, the back door made a soft noise, as if someone were trying to open it. They both jumped to their feet. Elias drew his gun. Clara grabbed the box, hugging it to her chest. "Someone is over there," Clara whispered. Elias walked to the back door, his footsteps echoing in the wind. When he opened the door, the backyard stretched out to the pine trees, but there was no one in sight, just a rope hanging from a post, swaying gently. Elias touched the string, frowning. It was no coincidence. Someone wanted us to know they were here. Clara looked at the string, a chill running down her arm. A message. She whispered, "They want to warn us." Elias turned his gaze resolutely towards the house. "Then we must hold on. Clara, you must not be alone any longer, until all this is cleared up." Clara looked at him for a long time. "I trust you, Elias Ward. For the first time in years, I trust someone." The softness in Elias's eyes eased Clara's fear a little. "We will get through this." His voice was low and steady. "Together." She nodded. "Together." The two of them put all the documents in the box and closed it tightly. As they left the house, Clara paused for a second to look at the rotten window. A part of her memory was still in that house, but for the first time, the memory did not cause her to feel suffocated by pain. Instead, it brought a clear, strong purpose. She placed her hand on her chest. "Dad, I will go all the way." Elias stood beside her, watching her face in the fading sunset. There was a quiet trust in his eyes, and something deeper, something he didn't say, but Clara could feel. As they walked, the footprints on the porch remained clear, a reminder that the darkness would continue to follow them. But this time, Clara did not run. She knew the enemy. She had the truth, and she had someone standing by her, not out of duty, but by choice. The walk back to Maple Haven seemed longer than usual. The wind blew through the old pines, making a rustling sound like a whisper of time. Elias walked beside them, his hand holding the reins of their horse. Clara hugged the file to her chest, feeling her heart pounding, but no longer panicking. It felt like a light after a long night, fragile but solid. As Maple Haven came into view, yellow light from the kitchen shone through the glass doors. Mrs. Eliza must be preparing something for the boarders. Clara watched with a sinking heart. The peacefulness of the house, a stark contrast to the storm she knew she was about to face. Elias opened the front door for her to enter. "You go in first. I need to tie the horse." Clara nodded and walked slowly inside. Mrs. Eliza was carrying a tray of hot cornbread when she stopped when she saw Clara's red but determined eyes. "Hey, Clara, are you okay?" She smiled slightly. "I'm fine. Ma'am." Eliza looked at the chest she held tightly, then into her eyes, as if she had guessed something. "Whatever you find today, however difficult the road ahead, remember that you are not alone." Clara bowed her head in thanks. Her heart felt warm, though it was still heavy. Elias entered shortly after, bringing with him the chill of the night air. He placed his hand on Eliza's shoulder. "We need to talk in the back room. It'll be fine. There's no danger. Mrs. Eliza nodded slightly, her eyes still on Clara. "I'll always be watching you, whether you say it or not." Clara choked on the words. She walked into the back room, where Elias had prepared a table. They placed the file cabinet on it. As the oil lamp illuminated the edges of the old paper, Clara knew her journey had reached a point of no return. Elias flipped through a stack of documents, his expression turning solemn. "Clara, what's in here doesn't just prove your father's innocence. It also proves that Pike sold weapons to deserters for years. He manipulated the people into believing your father was a traitor." Clara looked at her father's writing. He knew he was dangerous, but he wrote it down anyway, because he believed the truth would one day be revealed. Elias put his hand on the diary. "Now it's our turn to bring the truth to light." The words seemed to stir a strength deep inside Clara. The fear was still there, but her courage was now greater than her pain. How could she make people believe her, Elias thought for a moment. "I will call a meeting at the town hall. All the people, the patrol chief, the security forces, they will hear it from you. They need to see the evidence." He paused. "And you must stand before Pike." Clara took a deep breath. "He took my father's honor. I would take it back. With the truth." Elias looked at her for a long time. There was something softer than concern in his eyes. "You are much stronger than you think." Clara smiled slightly, but her eyes were a little shimmering. "No, I was only strong knowing that." Someone was standing next to me. An emotional silence passed between the two. Elias tilted his head slightly, as if he wanted to say something, but he held back, perhaps not wanting to break the feelings Clara needed to overcome on her own. They spent hours going through the documents, organizing each piece of evidence. Clara read page by page, sometimes pausing for a long time to read her father's words. Each sentence carried the breath of a man driven to the brink of death, but still holding on to his conscience. When everything was almost ready, Elias stood up. "You should rest a bit. The session will start soon." Clara nodded, but her eyes remained on the diary. "Elias, have you ever thought the truth might cost someone?" Elias came to her and sat down beside her. "The truth always had a price, but lies always had a higher price." Clara nodded slightly, his words echoing in her mind long after. When she stepped out into the hallway to return to her room, the hallway was strangely silent. There was no sound of the stove, no rustle of the wind outside. Only the smell of old pine mixed with the scent of Eliza's peppermint tea lingered in the air. As Clara placed her hand on the doorknob, Elias's shadow appeared behind her. "Clara!" She turned back. "No one has the right to make you doubt yourself anymore. Not Pike, not the past. I will stand by you, but you have to be the one to step into the light." His voice was soft but firm. Clara looked deep into his eyes, seeing the stability she had lacked for years. "I know," she replied, "and I will." Elias nodded and turned away, but Clara unconsciously called after him. "Elias?" He stopped. "Huh." She squeezed the diary gently in her hand. "Thank you for believing in me when no one else did, even when I wasn't sure I could stand." Elias didn't say anything right away. A warmth crept into his eyes. "Someone like you is trustworthy." Clara Mae. That sentence made Clara's shoulders feel a little lighter, as if she had just lifted a burden that she had carried for too long. She entered her room and placed the file on the bedside table. Through the window, the moon dipped low over the valley, bathing Dusty Hollow in a quiet silver light. The peaceful beauty was a stark contrast to the storm that tomorrow would bring. But Clara was no longer shaking. She sat down on the edge of the bed and opened her father's diary one last time before going to sleep. On the last page, beneath the hastily scribbled lines, was a sentence she had never seen before. "My daughter, if the world turns its back on you, stand up straight, for the truth never needs a crowd." When she finished reading, Clara gently placed her hand on her heart. "Father, I'm back, and I'm going to go all the way. Not for revenge, not to bury the past, but to save the light that Father fought to keep until the very end." And as Clara leaned against the wall, after looking back at the journey from when she stepped off the carriage to Dusty Hollow, she realized something. The loneliness she had carried for so many years was no longer intact. Someone was waiting for her to come out. Someone looked at her with eyes that held no judgment. Someone smiled at her, as if he had known her all his life. Tomorrow would be the day to face it. But today, for the first time in years. Clara felt hope was no longer a luxury. Clara and Elias' story reminds us that sometimes the most powerful healing comes not from time, but from the courage to face the pain. As we age, we all carry with us losses, things left unsaid, and mistakes that we have hidden for years. But the truth has its own power. When we dare to step back into the places that hurt us, we not only find peace, but we also find ourselves. Like Clara, we can carry our loneliness for a long time, thinking that no one understands. But sometimes, just a look, a person willing to stand beside us, is enough to see that the road ahead is not so dark. It's never too late to start over. It's never too late to choose kindness, truth, and love. Thank you, the audience who have always accompanied the channel. If the story touches your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so that we can continue to bring you deep and very human emotional journeys.